Vector stood in the briefing hall and tried not to show his anger. Around him, warriors from across the Galactic Coalition prepared for deployment. Thurian soldiers like himself, with their thick scales and powerful builds. Zenthi flyers with their quick reflexes. Corvin heavy troops with their natural armor. All of them were veterans. All of them had earned their place in this fight. And then there were the humans. Vector had heard stories about them. Everyone had. They were the newest species to join the coalition, barely 40 years in space. They were small and fragile, with soft skin that could be cut by the smallest blade. They died easily from temperatures that other species found comfortable. Their bones broke under pressure that would not even bruise a Thurian. They were weak. But that was not what made other species whisper warnings about them. The problem with humans was that they did not think like proper warriors. They formed emotional attachments to anyone and anything. They refused to abandon their wounded, even when staying meant death. They showed mercy to enemies who would never show mercy to them. They made decisions based on feelings instead of logic. Other soldiers who had fought alongside humans came back changed, speaking in quiet voices about things they had seen. Things that did not make sense. Vector did not want to believe the stories. Now he was about to find out for himself. The assignment had come through that morning. Joint Strike Force, they called it. Thurians and humans working together. When Vector saw the orders, he had gone straight to his commander. This had to be a mistake. He was an elite shock trooper. He had fought in 17 campaigns across 12 worlds. He had decorations that proved his worth. He did not need to babysit inexperienced aliens who were too emotional to follow proper military doctrine. His commander had not changed the orders. The mission was too important, he said. They needed every soldier they could get, even humans. So Vector stood in the briefing hall and watched the human contingent enter. They were led by a woman who introduced herself as Commander Jiwoo Park. She was small, even for a human. She barely reached the center of his chest. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple style. Her uniform was neat, but showed signs of wear. She smiled when she greeted him, offering her hand in the human gesture of greeting. Vector did not smile back. He touched her hand briefly, the minimum required by protocol, and then stepped away. He was here to do a job, not make friends with aliens who would probably get themselves killed in the first battle. The briefing began. The tactical officer, a Zenthi named Kix, brought up the star charts. Their mission was to defend Kepler Station against the Kresh swarm. The Kresh were insectoid creatures that consumed everything in their path. They had been pushing into Coalition space for 3 months now, destroying everything they touched. Kepler Station was the last defensive point before they reached the civilian evacuation routes. 200,000 refugees were passing through the system. Families fleeing the Kresh advance. Children, elderly, wounded. They needed 3 days to complete the evacuation. 72 hours. The Coalition forces had to hold Kepler Station for 72 hours. After that, reinforcements would arrive and push the Kresh back. But for those 3 days, they would be alone against an enemy that outnumbered them 5-1. Kix outlined the defensive positions. The station had 4 major sectors: north, south, east, and west. Each sector needed a command team. Vector would lead the Thurian heavy assault unit in the northern sector. It was a good position, easily defended. He was satisfied with the assignment. Commander Park spoke up. Her voice was calm and steady. She said her human teams would take the southern and eastern sectors. Those were the most dangerous positions, the ones most likely to be hit first and hardest. She said it like it was not a problem. Like sending her people into the worst danger was just part of the job. Vector watched the other humans. They did not protest. They did not ask for safer positions. Some of them nodded. A few smiled at each other. They were volunteers, he realized. They had asked for the dangerous positions. He did not understand it. What kind of warriors ran toward danger when they could avoid it? What kind of commander sent her people into certain death? The briefing ended. Forces began moving to the transport ships that would take them to Kepler Station. Vectar gathered his unit and reviewed their equipment one final time. Thurian soldiers were professionals. They checked their weapons in silence. They knew their jobs. They would hold their position or die trying. That was the Thurian way. He saw the humans nearby, preparing for deployment. They were different. They talked to each other constantly, voices overlapping. They laughed at jokes he did not understand. They touched each other, hands on shoulders, brief embraces. Some of them were writing on paper, old-fashioned letters that they sealed and handed to a supply officer. Messages for their families, Vectar realized. Messages in case they did not come back. One of the younger humans sat alone, staring at nothing. His hands shook slightly. Commander Park sat down next to him. She spoke too quietly for Vectar to hear, but he saw the young soldier nod, saw his hands steady, saw him stand up with new purpose in his eyes. Whatever she had said, it had helped. Vectar turned away. Humans and their emotions, it was inefficient, it was unprofessional, it would probably get them killed. The transport ships launched. 6 hours to Kepler Station. Vectar spent the time reviewing tactical maps and running combat simulations. He prepared himself for battle the way Thurians always did, with logic and training and absolute confidence in his abilities. When they arrived at Kepler Station, the refugee ships were already there. Hundreds of them crowding the docking bays, families moving through the corridors with whatever belongings they could carry. The air was full of fear and hope mixed together. The coalition forces moved into position. Vectar's unit took control of the northern defensive grid. They set up weapons platforms and shield generators. They established firing lines and fallback positions. Everything was done by the manual, exactly as it should be. He checked on the other sectors. Humans were settling into their positions in the south and east. They moved efficiently, he had to admit. They knew what they were doing. The Kresh fleet was 6 hours out. 6 hours until the battle began. 6 hours until Vectar found out if the stories about humans were true. He checked his weapons one more time. He said a brief prayer to the Thurian war gods, and he waited for the enemy to arrive. Around him, the station prepared for war. 200,000 refugees depending on them. 72 hours to hold. And somewhere in the southern sector, humans were checking on each other one more time before the fighting started. Vectar told himself it did not matter. Told himself that emotions would not help when the Kresh came. Told himself that proper military discipline was all that mattered. He would learn soon enough how wrong he was. The Kresh came like a dark wave across space. Their ships filled the sensor screens, hundreds of them moving in perfect coordination. They did not send warnings. They did not make demands. They simply attacked. Vectar watched from the northern command center as the first weapons fire lit up the void. The station's defensive shields flared bright as Kresh plasma bolts struck home. The battle had begun. The eastern sector took the first hits. The Kresh focused their assault there, trying to crack the station's defenses with overwhelming force. Vectar monitored the tactical displays. The defenders were holding, but barely. Return fire from the station's weapons was steady and accurate. Good. Professional. 1 hour into the battle, Vectar's northern sector engaged the enemy. Kresh fighters swarmed toward his position. He gave the order to fire. Thurian weapons systems roared to life. The void filled with explosions as Kresh ships died by the dozens. His warriors fought with perfect discipline. Each one knew their role. Each one executed their orders exactly. When a weapons platform overheated, the backup team was already moving to replace it. When shields weakened, power was rerouted from secondary systems. Everything according to training, everything by the manual. This was how real warriors fought, with logic and training and no wasted motion. Vectar felt pride in his troops. Let the humans have their emotions. Thurians had discipline. Then the eastern defensive grid collapsed. The tactical display showed it happening. One moment the shields were holding, the next moment they failed completely. Kresh ships poured through the breach like insects through a crack in a wall. The defenders fell back to secondary positions, but it was clear they were overwhelmed. Vectar expected this. The intelligence reports had been wrong about enemy numbers. The Kresh had brought twice the expected force. Some positions would fall. That was the mathematics of war. You calculated the acceptable losses and adapted your strategy. The northern sector continued to hold. Vectar's unit destroyed 3 Kresh heavy assault ships and drove back 2 attack waves. He felt satisfied. His warriors were proving their worth. Then the emergency broadcast came through. Southern sector. The human position led by Sergeant Minjun Choi. All communications lost. Last sensor readings showed the position being overrun. Command Center designated the sector as lost and ordered surrounding units to seal the breaches. Vectar acknowledged the order. It was unfortunate, but predictable. The humans had taken the most dangerous positions. Of course, they would be the first to fall. He began redirecting forces to contain the breach where Choi's team had been. Commander Park's voice came through his comm system. She was requesting permission to send a rescue team into the lost sector. Vectar denied the request immediately. It made no tactical sense. The sector was full of Kresh warriors. Any rescue team would be cut to pieces before they reached the area. They would lose more soldiers trying to save people who were probably already dead. It would weaken the defenses in other sectors. It was a terrible idea. Park's reply was brief. She said she was not asking permission. She was informing him what she was about to do. Before Vectar could respond, Park had taken her reserve squad and headed for the breached sector. He pulled up the tactical display, tracking their movement. This was insane. This was suicide. This was exactly the kind of emotional decision-making that got soldiers killed. He watched because he could not look away. The tactical display showed Park's team moving through corridors that were thick with Kresh signatures. The scanners indicated massive enemy presence. No reasonable force should have been able to move through that territory. But the humans kept moving, not toward safety, not toward the nearest extraction point, deeper into enemy territory, toward Choi's last known position. Vectar pulled up the security camera feeds. He had to see this, had to understand what the humans were doing. The footage showed things that should not have been possible. Park's team moved through the corridors like water flowing around rocks. When Kresh warriors attacked from the front, humans were already providing covering fire. When enemies appeared from side passages, humans had already positioned themselves to intercept. They moved together like they shared one mind. A human soldier went down with a Kresh blade in her shoulder. Before she hit the ground, 2 others were already there. One dragged her to cover. The other put himself between her and the enemy, taking hits on his armor that were meant for her. They did not leave her. They did not even consider leaving her. The team pushed deeper. They were fighting through hundreds of Kresh. The scanners showed impossible odds. The humans did not care about odds. Vectar saw Sergeant Yoon Seo Kim on the cameras. She was small, even for a human. When her squad got trapped in a junction with Kresh closing in from 3 sides, she did something that made no tactical sense. She stepped into the open and started firing at the largest group of enemies, drawing their attention, making herself the target. While the Kresh focused on her, the rest of her squad moved the wounded to safety. Kim took 3 hits to her armor before she could get back to cover, but the wounded were safe. She had chosen to risk herself so others could live. 40 minutes after they entered the breach, Park's team reached Choi's position. The cameras showed the scene. Choi and his 5 soldiers were pinned down, surrounded, nearly out of ammunition. They were still fighting, still standing. They had refused to fall. Park's team hit the creche from behind. The enemy had not expected an attack from that direction. No sane force would have come through that much enemy territory. But humans were not sane, not by the standards of other species. The breakthrough was violent and fast. Humans fought with a purpose that Vector had never seen before. They were not trying to win. They were trying to get their people out. Every move, every shot, every risk was calculated for that single goal. They pulled Choi's team out, all 6 of them, alive, wounded, but alive. Then they fought their way back out through the creche swarm. Vector watched the entire extraction on the security feeds. He watched humans cover each other. He watched them take hits meant for wounded teammates. He watched them coordinate without speaking, moving together like they were connected by invisible threads. He watched them refuse to leave anyone behind, even when staying meant more danger. Park's team emerged from the breach 38 minutes after they entered. 3 humans were wounded. 0 were dead. 0 were abandoned. They had gone into impossible territory and brought everyone back. They returned to their defensive positions without ceremony. Park did not make speeches. She did not seek recognition for the rescue. She simply checked on her wounded, made sure they were getting medical care, and then went back to coordinating the defense. Vector stood in his command center and tried to understand what he had just witnessed. By every tactical calculation, that rescue should have failed. Park should have lost half her team trying to save people who were probably already dead. Instead, she had brought everyone home. This was not the behavior he expected from inexperienced warriors. This was not the emotional foolishness he had been warned about. This was something else, something he did not have words for yet. The battle continued. The creche pressed their attack. The station's western quarter fell to the enemy assault, but the southern sector held. The humans held, and somehow, impossibly, they had not lost a single soldier. Vector looked at his tactical displays with new eyes. The humans were not fighting the way he fought. They were not following Thurian doctrine, but they were effective in ways he had not expected. Maybe the stories were true. Maybe there was something about humans that other species had learned to respect, or fear. He was beginning to understand why. 34 hours into the 72-hour defense, Vector realized they were losing. Not quickly, not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, the creche were grinding them down. The station had lost 40% of its territory. Coalition forces were down to 60% combat effectiveness. The creche adapted to every tactic, every strategy. They learned from each attack and came back stronger. The defenders held their positions, but it was costing them. The civilian evacuation was only 60% complete. 80,000 refugees still needed to escape. The transport ships were working as fast as they could, but they needed time. Time the defenders might not have. Command Center estimated the station would fall within 12 hours. They would not make it to the 72-hour mark. The refugees would be trapped. The creche would kill them all. Vector studied the tactical displays, searching for options. There had to be a way, some strategy he had not considered, some position they could hold that would buy more time. Then the sensors detected something new, a massive biosignature in the creche fleet, something they had not deployed before. The tactical officer identified it, a Dreadclaw, a creche bioweapon the size of a small ship. It was bred for one purpose. It secreted a toxin that was deadly to most carbon-based life forms. The creche were sending it toward the station's environmental systems. The science team ran calculations. 6 hours until the toxin entered the life support circulation. 6 hours until it spread through the civilian sections of the station. Most species would die within minutes of exposure. The evacuation ships could not accelerate their schedule. There was no way to get everyone out in time. 80,000 people would die, unless someone could stop the toxin from spreading. Commander Park requested an emergency meeting with all sector commanders. Vector joined the communication channel, expecting to hear a surrender offer. The situation was impossible. There was no solution. Park presented her plan. A small team would infiltrate the crash-controlled engineering deck. They would reach the environmental control center and manually purge the toxin from the circulation systems. It required someone to enter the contaminated zones where the toxin was most concentrated, where exposure would be fatal within minutes. Vector pointed out the obvious problems. The toxin killed most species in seconds. Even species with resistance would die within a minute or two. No one could survive long enough to complete the purge sequence. Park acknowledged this. She said human physiology was slightly more resistant to the toxin. Their bodies could handle it for maybe 3 or 4 minutes. Maybe. It would be enough time to finish the purge. Maybe. This was not a plan. This was suicide with extra steps. Vector said so directly. Park did not argue. She simply asked if anyone had a better idea. No one did. The silence on the communication channel was heavy. She said she needed 2 volunteers. Before she finished speaking, every human on the channel was volunteering. Every single one. They were arguing with each other about who should go. Actually arguing because everyone wanted the assignment. Vector could not understand it. They knew it was a death mission. They knew the odds. They still wanted to go. Park made her choice. Corporal Hana Song and Private Tai Yang Lee. They were the youngest members of her unit, barely adults by human standards. They accepted the assignment without hesitation. Vector protested. They were too young, too inexperienced. If this mission had to happen, it should be veterans, soldiers who had already lived full lives. Park's response surprised him. She explained that Song and Lee had the smallest body mass in her unit. They would need less oxygen. They could move faster in the tight spaces of the engineering deck. Their smaller size gave them the best chance of success. It was cold calculation, mathematical logic, the kind of decision a Thurian commander would make. Except Park's voice was not cold when she said it. Her hands shook slightly as she gave the order. She was making the logical choice, but it was clearly hurting her to do it. The emotion did not stop her from doing what needed to be done. Song and Lee prepared for the mission. They put on environmental suits with extra shielding. They checked their equipment 3 times. They recorded final messages for their families. Then they headed for the engineering deck. Vector monitored their progress from the command center. He pulled up their bio signs on his display. Heart rates elevated but steady, blood oxygen normal. They moved through Kresh territory quickly, avoiding enemy patrols when possible, fighting through them when necessary. They reached the contaminated zone. The airlock sealed behind them. The toxin was in the air now, eating through their suits molecule by molecule. Vector watched the biosign displays. This was how he would measure their deaths, with numbers on a screen. Song and Lee split up, each heading for different control nodes. The purge sequence required both nodes to be activated simultaneously. They had to work fast. Lee reached his node first. His hands were shaking on the camera feed. The toxin was already affecting his nervous system. He fumbled with the control panel, fingers not responding correctly. Vector heard him curse in frustration. Song's voice came through the comm system. Steady, calm. She talked Lee through it. Told him to focus on one movement at a time. Told him he could do this. Told him she believed in him. Her own breathing was becoming labored as the toxin permeated her suit, but her voice never wavered. Lee completed his sequence. Song finished hers moments later. The purge began. The environmental systems roared to life, cycling the contaminated air out into space and drawing clean air in. It would take several cycles to clear the toxin completely, but it was working. Song and Lee had 40 seconds before the toxin concentration became lethal. They needed to get out. Now. Both of them collapsed. The toxin had done too much damage. Vector saw their biosigns dropping. This was it. They had saved 80,000 people, and now they were going to die in a contaminated corridor. The human rescue team did not wait for orders. They were already moving. Commander Park led them personally, running into zones that had just been purged but were still dangerous. They reached Song and Lee with seconds to spare. The human medic, Ji-Won Kang, went to work immediately. She was fierce, determined. She kept talking to Song and Lee even though they were unconscious, told them they were not allowed to die, told them they had to keep fighting, told them she was not giving up on them. The rescue team got them back to the medical bay. Kang worked on them for 3 hours. Other medical staff from different species helped, following her orders without question. She would not accept that they were dying. She simply refused. Song and Lee survived. Barely. They would need weeks of recovery. But they lived. Against all odds, they lived. Vector went to the medical bay after they were stabilized. He looked at the 2 young humans, unconscious in their medical pods. They had walked into certain death to save people they had never met. Refugees from species they barely knew. They had done it because someone needed to, because the alternative was letting 80,000 people die. That was not recklessness. That was not inexperience. That was something else entirely. He thought about Park's decision. The cold mathematics combined with clear emotional pain. He thought about Song talking Lee through the procedure even as she was dying. He thought about the rescue team that did not wait for orders because of course they were going to get their people out. Humans calculated odds exactly like Thurians did. They understood tactics and strategy and acceptable losses. But where Thurians sacrificed pieces for victory, humans sacrificed themselves for each other. And somehow, impossibly, they survived because they refused to let each other die. Vector was beginning to understand what terrified other species about humans. It was not their weapons or their technology. It was their loyalty, their absolute refusal to abandon anyone they considered one of their own. The toxin was purged. The refugees were safe. The evacuation continued. 14 hours left in the defense. The Kresh were preparing their final assault, and Vector was starting to wonder what it would be like to have someone believe he was worth saving the way humans believed in each other. 58 hours into the defense, the station was barely holding together. The Kresh knew the coalition forces were exhausted. They knew reinforcements were coming soon. This was their last chance to break through, and they were throwing everything they had at the defenders. The command center projected station failure within 2 hours. Every sector was under assault. Every defensive position was at its breaking point. The evacuation was 85% complete. 30,000 refugees still needed to escape. 30,000 lives depending on soldiers who had been fighting for more than 2 days straight. Commander Park appeared on Vector's communication screen. She looked tired. There was dried blood on her uniform from wounds she had not taken time to properly treat. But her eyes were still sharp, still focused. She had a proposal. Combine their tactics. Thurian shock assault paired with human rapid response. Use Thurian strength for frontal defense and human adaptability to cover the gaps. Work together instead of just fighting alongside each other. Vector agreed immediately. He had watched the humans fight for 58 hours. He had seen what they could do. He wanted that on his side. They coordinated their forces. Thurian heavy weapons at the front lines, creating walls of firepower that the Kresh had to push through. Human rapid response teams behind them, ready to flood into any breakthrough. When the Kresh found a weakness, humans were already there to seal it. When humans got overwhelmed, Thurian covering fire gave them room to regroup. It worked better than Vector expected. The two forces complemented each other. Thurians held the line with devastating firepower and refused to give ground. Humans adapted to everything the Kresh threw at them and refused to break. Together, they were stronger than either species alone. The Kresh attacks intensified. They were desperate now. Their assault waves came faster and harder. They stopped trying tactical maneuvers and just pushed forward with raw numbers, trying to overwhelm the defenders through sheer force. During one particularly brutal assault, Vectar's unit became separated from the main defensive line. A Kresh breakthrough had cut them off. They were surrounded, 50 Thurian warriors against hundreds of Kresh. Vectar calculated their odds of survival. Not good, possibly zero. He prepared to sell their lives expensively. Thurians did not surrender. They would fight until they fell. It was an honorable death. Then humans arrived. Commander Park led the assault personally. Her team punched through the Kresh lines like a hammer through glass. They fought with a ferocity that shocked him. These were the same humans who showed mercy to enemies, the same ones who risked everything to save wounded. Now they were cutting through Kresh warriors to reach his surrounded unit. The breakthrough was violent and fast. Humans created a corridor through the enemy forces. Park's voice came through the comm system, telling Vectar's unit to move. Now. They fought their way through the corridor. Humans covered their retreat, holding back the Kresh swarm. When they regrouped at the defensive line, Vectar asked Park why she had risked her soldiers. His unit could have held out longer, could have given the defense more time. Sacrificing human lives to save Thurians made no tactical sense. Park looked at him like he had said something strange. She said simply, "You are one of us now." One of us. Vectar felt something shift inside him. No other species had ever said that to Thurians. Most species respected Thurian warriors. Some feared them. None of them considered Thurians as part of their group. Thurians were allies, useful, reliable, but always separate, always other. Humans had decided he was one of them. And for humans, that meant something. It meant they would come for him. It meant they would risk themselves to save him. It meant he mattered. The horror of it settled over him slowly. This was what other species had tried to warn him about. This was what made humans terrifying, not what they did to enemies. What they did for people they considered their own. They made you believe you were worth saving. Then they proved it, over and over until you could not doubt it anymore. The fighting continued. Hour 62, hour 64, hour 66. The defenders were exhausted, running on stimulants and willpower. Medical supplies were almost gone. Ammunition was critically low. Every soldier was wounded. Some could barely stand. The humans kept fighting. Private Sumin Quan had 3 broken ribs and a fractured arm. She was still at her position, still firing her weapon. When a Kresh warrior charged Vectar from the side, she threw herself between them, took the hit meant for him. She went down hard. Vectar killed the Kresh and went to Quan. She was hurt badly, bleeding. She looked up at him and smiled through the pain, said, "Cannot let you die before we win." She treated her injuries like they were temporary inconveniences. Like getting stabbed by a Kresh blade was just something that happened. Like protecting him was more important than protecting herself. The human medic patched her up. Quan refused to leave her position. She stayed and fought. They all did. Every human was wounded. Some had injuries that would have sent other species to medical care. They stayed anyway. They fought anyway. Because someone needed them to. Vectar watched Commander Park coordinate the defense while bleeding from 3 separate wounds she had not had time to treat properly. She did not acknowledge the pain, did not slow down, just kept giving orders, kept checking on her people, kept fighting. Hour 68 arrived. Every defensive position was hanging by a thread. The Kresh were everywhere. The station was failing. But the humans did not break. Their bodies were failing. They stood anyway. Their weapons were running dry. They fought anyway. They should have collapsed hours ago. They simply refused. Vectar understood now. Humans did not break because breaking meant letting others down. As long as someone needed them, as long as people were depending on them, they would keep standing. Pain did not matter. Exhaustion did not matter. Their own survival did not matter. Only protecting others mattered. It was terrifying. Beautiful and terrifying. watching people push past every limit because they had decided other lives were worth more than their own comfort, worth more than their safety, worth more than their lives. Sergeant Choi fought with a punctured lung. Corporal Song fought with a broken arm. Private Lee fought with toxin damage still affecting his system. They all fought. Not because they were ordered to, because they could not imagine doing anything else. The Kresh final assault was coming. Intelligence said it would hit at hour 71. Everything the enemy had left. One massive push to break the station before the reinforcements arrived. Vector looked at the humans around him, wounded, exhausted, bleeding, still standing, still ready. They had been fighting for almost 3 days straight. They had taken 70% casualties. They had saved thousands of lives. And they were not done yet. He thought about Park's words. "You are one of us now." He was starting to understand what that meant, what it cost, what it offered. The Kresh were coming. 4 hours left until reinforcements. 4 hours until victory or death. The humans checked their weapons one more time. They checked on each other. They prepared to hold the line because that was what they did. Vector checked his own weapons. He stood with the humans. One of them now, for better or worse. If they were going to hold this station, they would do it together. The final battle was about to begin, and Vector was no longer afraid of fighting alongside humans. He was grateful for it. Hour 71. The final transport ships were loading the last refugees. Children, elderly, wounded. Families who had fled across half the galaxy to escape the Kresh. They were so close to safety. Just 45 minutes more. 45 minutes until the ships could launch and the rescue fleet would arrive. The Kresh knew this. Their entire remaining force hit the station in one massive surge. They were not trying to take territory anymore. They were trying to reach the docking bays. Trying to kill the refugees before they could escape. The main defensive line broke under the assault. Too many Kresh, too few defenders. The enemy flooded through the breach, heading straight for the docking bays where the last transport ships were loading. Commander Park made the call. Final defensive position. The narrow corridor leading to the docking bay entrance. It was the only place left where they could bottleneck the Kresh advance. Stop them from reaching the ships. But someone had to hold that corridor. For 45 minutes, against everything the Kresh had left. Vector gathered his remaining forces. 30 Thurian warriors. Still combat-capable, still ready to fight. They moved to the corridor and took positions. This would be their last stand. They would hold or die. There was no middle ground. The humans came with them, 60 soldiers, every one of them wounded. Some could barely walk. Sergeant Choi had a punctured lung that kept filling with fluid. Corporal Song's broken arm was splinted, but she could still fire her weapon one-handed. Private Lee's toxin exposure had left him with tremors that made his hands shake. They came anyway. Vector took position at the front of the corridor, the narrowest point, the place where the fighting would be most brutal. He expected to die here. He was ready. It was a good death, protecting the innocent, standing against evil. Thurian warriors asked for nothing more. The humans positioned themselves between him and the Kresh, between him and certain death. Vector ordered them back, told them to take the rear positions where they would be safer. They refused, not with disrespect, not with argument. They simply did not move. They had decided where they belonged, and it was at the front, protecting him, protecting each other. That was what humans did. The Kresh came, a wall of claws and teeth and rage. They hit the corridor like a tsunami. The defenders opened fire. The corridor filled with death. Vector fought at the front line. Humans fought beside him, not behind him, beside him. When a Kresh warrior got past his guard, Private Quan was already there. She blocked the strike with her body, took the hit meant for him. She went down. 2 other humans immediately pulled her back and kept fighting. The mathematics of the battle were simple. The Kresh had numbers, the defenders had position, The narrow corridor meant the Kresh could not use their full force. They had to come through in smaller groups. Groups the defenders could handle. As long as the defenders held the corridor entrance, the refugees were safe. But holding cost blood. Every minute, every second. The defenders were dying by pieces, not falling completely, just breaking down bit by bit, taking damage they could not recover from, fighting past injuries that should have put them down. Ammunition ran out after 20 minutes. The defenders switched to blades and whatever weapons they could find. Humans fought with knives and metal bars torn from the walls. They fought with bleeding hands and broken bones. They fought because stopping meant the refugees died. Sergeant Kim lost her rifle to a Kresh blade that shattered it. She picked up a piece of the broken weapon and used it like a club. When 3 refugees who had gotten separated appeared in the corridor, running from Kresh pursuers, Kim stepped between them and the enemy, took hits meant for them, held the line until other defenders could move the refugees to safety. Vectar saw it happen, watched Kim take wounds that should have killed her. She stayed standing through sheer willpower. Because those refugees needed someone to protect them, because she had decided they were worth bleeding for. This was the horror. This was what made humans terrifying. They turned themselves into shields for others, made the decision that other lives mattered more than their own survival, did it without hesitation, did it over and over until their bodies failed. And even then, they kept trying. 30 minutes. 40 minutes. The Kresh kept coming. The defenders kept holding. Barely. The corridor was slick with blood. The air was thick with smoke and death. Every defender was wounded. Some were beyond wounded. They stayed in formation, stayed fighting, because the alternative was unthinkable. Commander Park was hit. A Kresh blade that got through her guard. She went down. For a moment, Vectar thought she was dead. Then she pushed herself back up, bleeding badly. She got back into position and kept fighting. Did not acknowledge the wound, did not call for medical help, just fought, because her people needed her to. Vectar understood in that moment what true terror was. Not the fear of dying, not the fear of pain. The terror of realizing someone believed he was worth this, worth bleeding for, worth dying for. The humans had decided he was one of them. That meant they would stand between him and death, would sacrifice themselves so he could live. That loyalty was more frightening than any weapon. 45 minutes. The transport ships launched. The refugees were safe, all 200,000 of them, every single one evacuated. The mission was complete. Rescue fleet ships appeared on the sensors. Coalition reinforcements dropping out of faster-than-light travel. Cruisers and destroyers and carrier groups. Overwhelming force. The Kresh saw them and withdrew. The battle was over. The defenders stood in the corridor, covered in blood and barely able to move. They had held, against impossible odds, against an enemy that outnumbered them 5-1. They had held for 72 hours exactly. And every refugee was safe. Casualty reports came through. Humans had taken 70% casualties. Almost every human was wounded, but 0 human deaths. 0. They had refused to let each other die, had dragged wounded soldiers out of danger mid-battle, had provided medical care under fire, had simply decided that no one was dying today and made reality bend to that decision. Other species did not do that, could not do that. When Thurians took 70% casualties, death rates were proportional. That was mathematics. That was reality. Humans ignored reality, made their own rules, decided that their people were too valuable to lose, and somehow made it work. Vectar found Commander Park in the medical bay. She was finally accepting treatment now that everyone else had been helped first. 3 major wounds, dozen minor ones. Exhaustion that should have killed her. She was alive because her people had refused to let her die. Same reason all of them were alive. He asked her why humans fought this way, why they risked so much, why they turned themselves into shields for others. Park looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Because if we do not, who will? Someone has to be willing to stand between terror and those who cannot defend themselves. Someone has to believe that every life matters enough to fight for. Might as well be us." Simple words, simple answer. But it contained everything, the entire human philosophy. Someone has to protect the innocent. Someone has to stand against evil. Someone has to believe people are worth saving. Humans had decided they would be that someone, no matter the cost. Vector went to his quarters and recorded his combat assessment, the one that would go into Coalition files. He wrote about human combat capabilities, about their tactics and strategies, about their strengths and weaknesses. Then he wrote the truth, the thing other species whispered about. Humans were terrifying because they created bonds that could not be broken. They made you part of their family. Then they would tear through armies to protect family. That loyalty was a weapon no other species could match. True terror was not what humans did in war. True terror was understanding they would do it for you. That they would fight impossible battles because they decided you were worth it. That once they included you as one of them, they would never abandon you. Never leave you behind. Never stop fighting for you. That was terrifying. Beautiful and terrifying. Knowing someone believed you deserved that kind of loyalty, that kind of sacrifice. Vector submitted his report. Then he submitted a request. Permanent assignment to human units, not because humans were the best warriors, because when battle came, he wanted to fight beside people who believed he was worth saving. That was what he learned during those 72 hours. True terror found him when he fought alongside humanity. Terror of realizing he had become someone they would die to protect, and terror of understanding he would do the same for them. The humans had made him one of them, and he would never be the same.